Hi, everyone. Welcome to In Limbo Conversations. Today we have with us John Beverly, a doctoral research fellow at Northwestern University. His areas of research include logic, social epistemology, ethics, and applied ontology. For more details about his work, please check the link in the description. So, in this conversation, we're going to be talking to John about something that's really exciting to me. It is about ontology and its application in current situation. I think his work is one of the best examples to show how metaphysics at large and ontology more specifically can contribute to public crisis situations like the current one. So, thank you so much for joining me, John.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
So, as a background for our audience, I thought we could begin by talking about the motivation for and the necessity of infectious disease ontology. So, in the
Mhm.
preprint titled "The Infectious Disease Ontology in Age of COVID-19," which you had worked on with many others, I think Shane Babbitt, Lindsay Cobble, and Barry Smith, you guys had
Mhm.
mentioned that when we are dealing with a public health emergency like COVID-19, there is a need to share data across many disciplines and data systems, but that such sharing often gets hindered due to various issues. So, and also that these issues could be adequately addressed by ontology. So, could you tell
Mhm.
us in the context of COVID-19 specifically what kind of data is required to be shared across disciplines and data systems? And what are the issues which you have noticed in this process of sharing? And also, if you had to put it simply, how could we define ontology and how can ontology address these issues?
These are great questions. Absolutely. So I'll start with the last one and work my way back because I think the last one might be easiest to address, surprisingly. So, in traditional like analytic, at least metaphysics, ontology is sort of approached as like providing or thinking about like a recipe list for ingredients that you would put into the world. Like, what is there? And like, that's what ontology is, at least with a lowercase o. And so in applied ontology, we're sort of engaged in a similar project. But instead of thinking about like tropes or universals, we're thinking about things like viruses and like medicine or details about medicine. And so what we do is we bring the methodologies from traditional metaphysics, like conceptual analysis and stuff, into like the scientific disciplines, and we help organize information that researchers themselves, while good at organizing the expert or their area of expertise, maybe aren't paying attention or very close attention to like fine grained details, and so they miss some things. So this is important because what you don't want to happen is like somebody working in geography, somebody working in virology, trying to coordinate data that they've been acquiring about the spread of an infection for epidemiology or something, but nevertheless like using the word river two different ways or using the word virus two different ways, right? Which very likely happens when people aren't talking to themselves or using a shared vocabulary. In fact, this was in fact in the 80s sort of the motivation for the field of applied ontology. Turns out that a lot of researchers were gathering a lot of data because we had like new methods for acquiring things. We could put them in like spreadsheets and databases and stuff, but everybody was sort of inventing their own languages, and they weren't like talking to each other. Now, for the most part, they were using similar enough languages across these databases to like at least approximate some kind of communication. But the problem really isn't about like getting enough of a shared vocabulary, though, because there's so much data that we usually end up using computers to help, and computers are dumb in the sense that you have to be very careful about what you say, and like one little misstep in like how you translate a term over here is going to, when you try to translate that, or like at least use an automated computing system to do the translation over here, it's just going to miss that entirely. So ontologies, just which are really just structured vocabularies, like logically well-structured vocabularies, all they do is they come in and like make sure that across a wide range of disciplines, people are using the same language.
Okay. So it's like a taxonomy in that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a traditional, it's like a taxonomy like you might be exposed to in a biology class, except, and here's one of the benefits of it. We include a lot of like, I call them formal relations that have like logical properties. So among parts of the hierarchy. So for instance, instead of just saying this is like a this, or this is a subclass of this, which is what you would do in a normal taxonomy, in addition, we say things like and these things have parts. And like, right, like, and so parthood is a relationship that relates things in the taxonomy to other things in other parts of the taxonomy in different ways.
Okay, okay. So coming to infectious disease ontology, that is IDO. So in IDO code is a disease and pathogen neutral ontology, which covers just those entities and relations which are relevant to infectious diseases generally. So it is extended by disease and pathogen specific ontology modules. Could you please share how it is that your team generates the ontology? Maybe if possible, it would be really cool if we could sort of get a glimpse of the ontology for our audience to see. What is the
Oh yeah,
process by which you build this? Are there empirical components which sort of feature in this process?
yeah, absolutely. So we're sort of this problem I was sort of gesturing at a minute ago about researchers talking past each other. This is I think loosely speaking called the problem of data silos. You have like data stores or data lakes, and they're not like intertranslatable. And so ontologies come in and help address that translation issue. So when ontologies came on the scene, people were essentially on the same page about, oh yeah, look, we need like a common language that we can use to translate all this stuff into. But then what happened is a lot of researchers thought to themselves, okay, I'll just make up an ontology, which ended up regenerating the same problem, right? A bunch of we had like ontology silos. So because of that, though, I want to say in like the late 80s, a sort of group of ontologists, a consortium got together and they said, look, we're going to have certain ground principles and like we're going to have one set group of ontologies, and like other ontologies are going to extend from those. So we have a common core. And so that's the Oboe Foundry. And at the top of the Oboe Foundry is the basic formal ontology, which is developed by Barry Smith and has recently become an ISO standard. It's standardized across the world, right? It's very impressive. And I actually have a little picture here. I want to show you the hierarchy of it so you can see this is like the top level ontology that all ontologies will have to use when they're going to extend or build to a more specific domain. Let me bring this up. All right, share my screen. Is that okay if I share my screen?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. You see?
Yes, I can see.
Okay.
Oh my, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, so right here, like this is the tippy top. This is entity. Everything is an entity, at least insofar as anything relevant to scientific investigation. At least that's the idea. And then you can divide in BFO. You'll divide things into two classes. There's two major subclasses of entity, which are continuants, which are things like you and me, like right here, right now. And then on the other hand, you have occurrence, things that occur in time. They have like temporal components.
Sort of?
Yeah, they have flowing because ontologically speaking, we need both. We don't just want to talk about like material entities. We also want to talk about what they do and how they do it, right? Because that's science, right? It's mostly about, in fact, it's probably largely about things that are done. This is not a reductive sort of ontology either. So it's not like I'm just gonna and you see this in analytic metaphysics. I'm gonna start with material things and define everything else. We're not really interested in that. We want to give the researchers everything they need, and what we take, like, how do they speak about the world as a cue, right? And so they talk about processes, so they get processes, right? We're not trying to tell them what like they're wrong. We're just trying to give them the right resources.
In a certain sense, it's more descriptive than normative, in the sense that you're
absolutely right. Although I mean, you're absolutely right. It is like largely descriptive. Although when we talk about some issues, like things that maybe should be thought about going forward, that normative element is going to come up in surprising ways. But we'll talk about that in a minute. I think. Yeah.
Okay, that's
so.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
I'm just looking at it, and is it hard to hear? Maybe I'm speaking a bit low. Is it?
I think I was talking when you started talking, and I just wanted to make sure that
you weren't saying audio on screens. This is another level of communication learning. I'm sure this is going to come in therapy for the next generation. But thank you so much for sharing this. And I think I also looked at the at the website which had this. And, so I was wondering that do you guys collect data first and then sort of make this? Like, is it like based on empirical data you get from different places?
It's sort of like that. So Barry and a whole huge team of people developed this, and I worked on this myself. But I when I came to work on it, it was mostly set like this, and I was building the logic underpinning it. But what Barry did is he like thought really hard, like a philosopher does, because Barry's a philosopher. But he had a bunch of logicians and scientists working with him, and they gathered the data. And so he had like the philosophers doing the conceptual analysis, working right alongside like researchers from various like, biomedical domains, so they could figure out exactly what was needed. And they basically like listen to what the scientists are saying and help them by using our the tools of metaphysics to clear up confusion. So and Barry used to he loves to tell stories about like the sorts of confusions he would notice, like type token confusions, use mention confusions, just things that researchers aren't thinking about because, I mean, they're busy. Like, they got a lot of other stuff to think about. They just got to code all this data. If they're thinking about like phenotypes of some species of animal and they've got like been running experiments and stuff and want to get that info out, they're not really thinking about types and tokens or uses and mentions. And then when they write papers, they're susceptible to making these sorts of mistakes. But again, like, if you want to have computers help you, you got to be real careful. So we come in and like try to do that careful work for the scientists so that they can keep doing what they're doing. And they have this like really well-defined, logically well-defined background against which they can build.
Okay. Okay, that sounds really interesting. Bevel, John, you can stop sharing the screen now if that's okay with you,
yeah,
and I can move
absolutely.
on to the next. And thank you so much for sharing the screen, for sharing that with us. And so to the next question, I wanted to ask you about the extension of coronavirus infectious disease ontology, which is CIDO, and its a specific extension that focuses on COVID-19, which is called IDO COVID-19. So in the paper, you mentioned three broad ways in which IDO and IDO COVID-19 can be significantly helpful. So first, IDO COVID-19 could help with information-driven efforts to deal with the ongoing pandemic. Second, search ontologies can accelerate data discovery in early stages of future pandemic. And third, they also promote reproducibility of infectious disease research. So could you tell us a bit more about these benefits? And also, what do you feel are the limitations in the development of ontologies like IDEO right now? And how does your team intend to address it?
Absolutely. So we have like the right picture on the table. So the IDO core, the IDO core, the infectious disease ontology, that's sort of like a really more specific subset or more restricted sort of subset of the BFO ontology. So it's like you start with the top level stuff and then you get narrower and narrower as you get closer and closer to a target domain like COVID-19, which is a pretty specific thing you want to talk about. So in intermediary steps, we have from BFO, you have the infectious disease ontology covering them all. And then you have the virus infectious disease ontology, which we built starting over the summer as a sort of like a bridge between infectious disease ontology and then the coronavirus infectious disease ontology, which I sort of came to work on at the start of the pandemic with some researchers in the University of Michigan, Oliver Hay and his team. And so I've been working with them, but also like building around them. So we have like a stream, like a straight stream from BFO all the way down to an extension of Oliver's ontology, which is the IDO COVID-19 ontology. And so that's when we get to the really fine-grained level of like data or coordinating data for or about COVID-19. So that I just want to make sure we had that structure in place. And so when we get there, the sort of data that we're thinking about and the sort of stuff that we're annotating, it's like texts about from like the National Library of Science about clinical research, like trials that are going on right now. What we do is we think about the sort of like results of those trials and we tag them and annotate them with the ontology terms.
Okay.
And then we can run automated reasoners over what we tag, and we can generate new information. One of the things that Oliver actually showed us how to do, and which we've been doing, is you can take like ontologies that talk about chemistry, You can take ontologies that talk about drugs, and you can take ontologies that cover, say, SARS-CoV-1 or MERS or some other sort of coronavirus. You can look at those profiles, put all that information together, and spit out a range of options for drug treatments.
Oh.
And what you have, like drug treatment options for SARS-CoV-2, just based on how what we know about drugs that worked or seemed to be effective for the other coronaviruses. And so that's a lot of information to pull together. And of course, if a team got together and sat and thought about it really hard, they could do it. But what Oliver and his team did was like threw all this info into their processing units, tagged a bunch of articles with their ontologies, and like spat out hypotheses like within a couple of days. So it was pretty impressive. And they have some preprints on this. Like they generated a range of treatment options for corona or for the SARS-CoV-2 infections that people weren't thinking about. This is early days too. Like people just hadn't been considering them. Some of which have been taken up. Like researchers got to them eventually, but like Oliver and his team was like, I told you. Yeah. So it was useful in that respect, coordinating a whole bunch of data so you can generate hypotheses and generate options for treatment just based on like what we already know, which we know a lot. Again, Barry, I always like pointing to Barry. Barry likes to say, we probably have a cure for cancer. We just don't know it because like we got all this data and we haven't coordinated it all yet. But once we do, it's there.
And I was thinking, like, if we come to realize that COVID-19 is not it's not only a respiratory, like it's a multi-systemic infection and not so how does that make a change to the ontology on the formal sense? What are the changes you would have to make?
So hopefully we will, when we build the ontology, and as we've been building the ontology, we try to make sure that we only assert things that have reached a good level of consensus because we want to generate good hypotheses. So something like that, like if we find out it's like a multi-system issue, that's actually going to be something that's compatible with the way we're understanding like SARS-CoV-2 infections, because what we are doing is we're focusing on like the structure of the virus, the structure of like viral replication, like how the various pathways that a virus particle might or a virion might be involved in while it's generating pathogenesis in somebody. And pathogenesis, that's the transition from like infection to disease, that can take many different forms. In fact, one of the things that's really good about ontology is when we have all this information, not only can we like generate treatment options, like potential treatment options by pulling a bunch of data together, but we can also generate a bunch of pathways, like mechanisms of pathogenesis. And like, so we can be consistent with several of them. And maybe they're all like several of them are on display in various infections. And that would sort of makes sense, right? Because like SARS-CoV-2 infection has like a wide range of symptoms, right? It has a wide range of manifestations. People are dying of like ARDS, like acute respiratory disorder, very frequently. Some people are dying of pneumonia. Some people are dying of all sorts of things. And like the details are going to matter based on like environmental constraints and like demographic information. And like, again, our model is going to be consistent with explaining any of that stuff, like all those different ways of that like are through pathogenesis all the way to disease. So the short answer is hopefully we won't have to change much.
Okay.
And we'll let the researchers tell us which way we should be going, but we'll be compatible with each of those explanations. I think that's a strength because, as you see, like these infections are crazy. It's hard to tell like if there's one thing going on, because it seems like so many different symptoms can arise, and like people are having so many different complications, and it's such a new pathogen. It's really hard to say, but yeah.
Like a global laboratory for the formal, like applied ontology right now, in a certain sense.
Yeah.
Like you're actually looking at something evolve continuously, right? So, okay,
absolutely.
So what problems have you faced in developing these ontologies, like generally, and how do you guys address it? Like if like you had mentioned that there were geography and there are people from different areas, and you're talking to them, and also what kind of issues come up, and how do you generally deal with the big data, and are these institutional decisions which are made, or are these also dependent on philosophical commitments of you guys? How does it really work?
So I won't speak for all of the ontologists, but I try not to let my philosophical commitments get in the way. I was an engineer by training, so I kind of came into philosophy to do something else, and now, but that engineering training it really informs how I engage with scientists, and we all do engage with scientists. So the sort of consensus that arises is it's approached by philosophers who come in and doing applied ontology saying, look, we are not experts in biology. We're not experts in virology. Like, that's not what we do. But nevertheless, we can help you. Let me show you how. You might want to code this as like a human being as a social security number or something, but that's silly because people are not divisible by numbers, right? Like, so let me help you. Or you might want to think of like a country as a type of thing. I'm sorry, the United States as a type of thing. But it's not, it's a token of a type, the type being country. And this is a sort of common thing that's confused. So that's what we do. And then what we do is we'll like engage in like email conversations, or at this point, we're almost always Zoom calls or something. And we'll argue. We'll argue the same way philosophers have argued forever with scientists who are sort of like really interested in getting this stuff right, but haven't been thinking about it. And it's honestly, like, I won't say that I can't speak for all of the ontologists. Lots of ontologists who are philosophers do bring their philosophical convictions. But at the same time, lots of scientists come in and have their own like philosophical or scientific convictions, like say about what a virus is. Is it alive? Is it not? Right? Like, this is something that comes up in almost every talk I give about this. And every time I say to the scientists and the philosophers, I say, that's a very interesting question. It's also not one we need to address. Like, that's not, we don't have to decide that. We just need to model it. And then at that point, they're like, yeah, everybody's like, okay, that's right. Let's move on. So we have the convictions, but they're usually pointed out because this is like a practical problem or a series of practical problems that we're trying to solve. And while those are good questions to ask, it's like, we'll ask them later, right? Once we get the models down. Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so that reminds me of the instrumental sort of position on doing metaphysics and doing a speculative kind of, which is sort of taking over in, I think, metaphysics. I'm working in scientific metaphysics, so that also takes on the kind of work that scientific metaphysics is trying to do by looking at corroborating with and collaborating with different sciences than doing an armchair kind of in the ivory tower kind of philosophy. Yeah, so that's all the questions I wanted to ask you. And thank you so much for talking to me, John. It has been a wonderful conversation. You've been so patient. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, this was wonderful. I really appreciate this, and I'm so pleased with all the work that you and your team have been doing. And thank you so much for adding us to the bibliography and having me on for this interview. This is fantastic.